Hey guys, and welcome back to a new video. In this video we are going deeper into activities. We are going to discuss a lot of things related to activities. We're going first to start with activity stack and the back stack. Then we are going to move to creating activities manually or automatically with the help of the Android Studio. Then we will end up with navigating between activities and exchanging information between activities. But before doing so, I want to show you something that I forgot to show you in the last video. So as you can see here, we have the same example from the previous video, just a text view and some click listeners for our buttons, and we also have the same layout. Now, if you remember, I said in the last video that Android handles the configuration changes for us. And that is true, as whenever you rotate the screen or encounter some configuration changes that require the activity to be created, the default behavior is to reset the activity or recreate the activity. And I said if you want to handle the configuration changes by yourself, what you have to do is to go to the Android manifest file and you have to specify the config changes attribute here under the activity. And we also did that. But these are not only used to listen to the changes within the onConfiguration change callback. They are also used to let you handle the configuration changes yourself. So by adding the orientation and the screen size to the config change attribute, whenever both of these occur or whenever both of these happen to your application, the activity will not handle the configuration changes. So that means nothing will be reset and the activity will not be recreated. And I forgot to show you that in the last video. So as you can see here, our main activity, we are not using any save instance state callbacks, we are not using any restore instance state. Now if you run our app, whenever we reach a certain number within the counter, then we rotate our activity, the counter will not be reset to 0. As you can see here, we are rotating the device, the counter is not reset to 0. This is very useful whenever you want to prevent the activity from being recreated and you are just too lazy to add the onSave instance state or restore instance states. However, they are very important and you have to handle these. But sometimes you want to just open up Android Studio to create a quick project. And in this case, if you don't want to write the code to handle the state, you can just add the config changes attribute. And it also has its use cases that you can use in a real world application. So without any further delay, let's start with today's first topic, which is activity stack and the back stack. So what is activity stack and the back stack? Well, basically activity stack or the back stack are both different terms, however they are connected somehow. They are connected with the overview screen. So if you open the overview screen that shows the recent apps that you use within your Android device, you'd see a couple of cards that represent each application that you used. Now each card is called a task. And a single task is called a backstack or activity backstack, which consists of multiple screens or multiple activities. So if you, for example, watching YouTube on your mobile, then you want to view the comments under the video, you see that for example, maybe the comments is another screen and the video is another screen. If you press back, the video screen is popped off the backstack and now you are viewing the home screen of the YouTube application. Again, if you press the back button, the whole task or the whole backstack is popped off the screen and it's clearly removed from the user perspective. So the stack mechanism works in an abbreviated concept called LIFO, or last in, first out. So that means the last screen added to the stack is the first screen that leaves the stack. So this is similar to a tower or a pile of dishes. So if you have ever cleaned the dishes, and if you do in the first place, well, I personally do, but you would normally start with the last plate or the top plate on the pile, not the first plate, not the plate within the middle. So this is how the stack works. Now maybe I will use the term top of the stack within this video, and when I mean top of the stack, I mean the activity or the screen that is currently showed to the user. So whenever any activity or screen is at the top of the backstack or at the top of the stack, that means that the user currently viewing this screen. Now, how can we create other activities? How can we navigate between activities? Well, we will start first by creating an activity manually, then we will create activities automatically with the help of the Android Studio. So let's create our first activity. Here under the project or under your package, you'll right click, new, and we will create a class that extends the app combat activity, just like our main activity here. And for this, I will call it second activity. This is just a naming convention for activities. You add what does this activity do, or what is the thing that this activity is responsible for, then you add the activity. And here is going to be a class, then is going to inherit from app combat activity. Then finally, don't forget to add the constructor, And finally, we will override the onCreate. And we don't need this onCreate. We need the onCreate that has a single bundle. And here, just like the main activity, we will add the setContentView to refer to the view or the layout for that activity. So here, setContentView, and currently we don't have any layout, so we will make UnderStudio create that layout for us. r.layout.secondActivitySecond, and here Alt Enter, create layout resource file, click Enter, and it will be created. And now you can reference this layout within your activity. Cool. So the first step is to create activity, then you create the layout, and lastly, you have to add a signature for this activity within the manifest. So we have already discussed this in the second video or the third video, I think, of this playlist, where we said that the manifest file is considered to be the identification or an ID to your application. It must contain all the necessary information regarding your application. And we have also said that the activity is part of the Android application components that you have to add within your application tag here. And you can see here within the application tag, we have already the main activity set by the Android Studio automatically. So now we have to add our activity or the second activity. So make sure you are within the application tag. And here, just under the main activity, we will add the activity tag. Then for the name attribute, we have to specify the second activity, and then just add the closing tag. So now what we will do is we will create a button within the main activity that takes us to the second activity. Let's go to the main activity layout, and here we will just delete everything related to the last video. I'll just add a button real quickly and give it some ID and some descriptive text. And here I created the button. Now I'll go to the main activity. I'll just add the click listener to our button. Here, binding dot from main to second button. This is the ID of the button. Set on click listener. And here we are going to add our code that takes us to the second activity. Now, to navigate between different activities, we need something called an intent. And an intent is an object that we use in Android to communicate between different components. And we said before that the activity is considered to be a component of the Android application components. It's like a messaging system that allows you to request an action from another applications or share informations between different components within your own application or any external application. So you can basically run other applications or launch other applications from your own applications. And you can pass information between different components, between different applications with the help of the bundle that we discussed in the last video. So here we are going to create the intent. So val intent is going to equal to intent class, then we call the constructor. Now within the constructor, you can see we have some overloads. What we are going to use is this one before the last one, the package context and the class. So here, if you want to navigate from this activity to the other activity, you have to specify two things. First, the start point and the end point or the target activity. So here I'm going to say that the start point is going to be this activity or the main activity with this keyword. And then I want to specify the target activity that I want to go to, which is the second activity. And here I have to just have reference for the object or the instance of the activity by adding the class.java. Now we will call the start activity, and you can see here it takes an intent. If you press Ctrl P, you can see it takes an intent. So now we will pass our intent. Now let's run to see how this works. So as you can see here, here's our main activity. If we click on the second button, it will take us to the second activity. Now the backstack looks like this. The first activity is our main activity. The second activity is at the top of the back stack. If you press the back button, now the second activity is popped off the back stack and the first activity or the main activity becomes on top of the back stack as there is nothing on top of it. So cool. Let's see how we can create an activity with the help from Android Studio. So here under your project structure, you can right click anywhere and you click new, then activity, and you move to choose your desired type of activity. So in this case, we will use the empty activity, and here you can specify the activity name. So it's going to be third activity, and then you can check this if you want to generate a layout file. In this case, we need a layout file for the activity, so we will leave it checked. Then comes the layout name. I'll just leave it. And finally comes the launcher activity. So if this activity should be the activity that runs whenever you launch your application. In this case, I'll leave it unchecked and I'll click finish. Now you can see that the third activity class made it extend from the app combat activity. It added the onCreate as well as the set content view with a layout, and most importantly, it added the signature for our third activity within the manifest file. You see here, activity, the third activity. Currently, we don't need anything from these now. You can just delete them or leave them, doesn't matter for now. What we want to do is to launch the third activity from the second activity. But before this, I want to talk about a very important concept related to the different modes to launch an activity. So far we have been navigating from the main activity to the second activity without specifying any modes or anything that should customize how the launching of the second activity should happen. We just left it to the default behavior. And the default behavior is called the standard launch mode. And in this mode, a new instance of the activity is created every time it is launched. So whenever you navigate from the main activity to the second activity, it will create a new instance for the second activity. So let's see this with an example. So what we want to do is we want to navigate from the main activity, then to the second, then to the third, and from the third we want to add a button that takes us to the second activity. So here I'll just edit the layout real quickly. I will add a text view within the second activity that has second activity text just for convenience. I will do the same for the third activity, and I will add a button here for the third activity that takes us to the second activity. So now I'm done creating the layout. Here within our third activity, we have a button that takes us to the second activity, and we have this label here, as well as the second activity also have the label, and go to the third button. And finally, I added the label for the main activity as well. What we have left is to add functionality to both of the buttons. So here you can just replace the find view by ID by the binding, but in this case, I'll use the find view by ID really quickly instead of adding the binding. So button r.id.from second to third button, which is the button that I just created here. Make sure to import the button class. Then I'm going to add a click listener here. Again, you will have to create an intent. So intent, I want to go from this activity to the third activity. Again, import the intent. Finally, start the activity by passing the intent. And here, suppress this warning as we are sure that this button is within our layout. Now the same functionality, you will have to add it to the third activity. But instead of from second to third, is going to be from third to second. And here we have to go to the second activity. Again, suppress the warning, and finally run the application. So here we are at the main activity, click to the second, we are now at the second activity, go to third, we are now at the third activity, click to second activity again, click to third activity again, and we will just end up being on a loop if we continue clicking on the buttons. Now currently the backstack looks like this. First we have the main activity, then the second activity, then the third activity. And the first time we reached the third activity, we clicked on the button that launched the second activity again. So now we have two instances of the second activity within the backstack. And then we clicked again on the third activity and it launched the third activity again. So we have multiple instances of the same activity within the same backstack. And this is the default behavior if you didn't specify any launch mode. I'm not saying this is bad, no, sometimes use cases require you to create a new instance of an already existed activity in the backstack whenever you navigate to it. But I'm saying that you can specify a different launch mode to change this behavior. But before specifying any launch modes, let's see how we can pop or remove some activities from the backstack by pressing the back button. So we are now at the third activity. If we press back, now the third activity is popped from the backstack and we are at the second activity. Press back again, we are back to the third activity or the other instance of the third activity, which is the first one. Then again, back button and we are at the second activity. Once again, the back button, we are at the main activity. And now if you press the back button for the last time, we leave our application. Now let's specify some launch mode for our second activity, for example. So here within our manifest file, we will go to the second activity. And here we can do this by using the launch mode attribute. So the standard one here is the one set by default to all the activities that we currently have and all the activities that you will create later on. Now you can see we have other modes as well. I will not talk much about them in this video, or we would have a very long video, but I will also include a link to the description if you want to read more about them. But in a nutshell, the single instance and single task both reuse the same instance of your activity. So what we have seen before will never happen if you specify the launch mode single task and single instance, as it only enforces a single instance of the same activity. So here what we want to do is we want to have only a single instance of the second activity. So for this you can either choose single task or single instance. Both work the same, however they differ, as the single task runs on the same backstack, but the single instance creates a new independent backstack and makes the second activity the root of the new backstack. So in this case, it doesn't matter what we use, we want to use the single task. And now let's run to see the result. So now as you can see here, we have the main activity. Go to the second activity, go to the third activity, go to the second again. We are at the second activity, but in this case the backstack looks like this: main, then comes the second. As you can see here, the second is the same instance that we used before, and we will verify this in a minute. But you can see here that we got rid of the third activity, as now the second activity becomes the top of the stack, and anything on top of the second activity will be removed from the stack. So if you press the back button now, you will go back to the main activity, not the third activity. Back button again will make you leave the application. Now, how can we verify that the state is preserved of the second activity? And we want to verify that the second activity is not created from scratch. So for this, I'm going to add an edit text, and we will modify this edit text when we run our application. Let me just add it underneath the text view and attach it to the end and the start of the parent. Now we will run to see how this performs. Here again, go to the second activity, and in this case I will change the text of the edit text, ASD for example, then go to the third. Now go to the second, and you can see here the same instance of the activity is used. So this is equivalent to pressing the back button. So if you press the back button, the third activity will be popped off the stack, and now we have the same text or the same instance of the second activity. You can also change the launch mode of an activity programmatically by using flags of the intent. So here if you refer to the intent.flags, here you can add some flags or some constants that comes from the intent class to specify how this activity should be launched. So if you add the intent class, then you add the flags activity, you can see here the launch modes or the different flags that you can set to determine the launch mode for your activity. So for example here, your new task is equivalent to the single task that we used within our manifest file. However, it needs to be concatenated with the flag activity clear task. So here, flag activity clear task, both of them combined together will achieve the same behavior as the single launch mode attribute or the single launch mode that we specified within our Android manifest file. I will leave a link to the description below for the different flags for the different launch modes, so you can read about them, experiment with different activities to see how these flags affect the launch of your activities. So now how we can send data from the second activity to the third activity. Well, as we have said before, we can use the intent, as the intent is used to send messages or actions or any commands from different components within the same applications or any other application. And within the intent, there's a bundle that is responsible for sending some messages or actions or whatever extra information that you want to put. And here we will use our intent to send a message to the third activity or send a string to the third activity. So here intent, and then we're going to call put extra. So what is the extra information that we want to specify? You can see here we have different data types that we can specify. We can also send the whole bundle. What we want to do here, what we want to send is a text or is a string. So first you have to specify two things. First the key, so I'm gonna call it greet key, and then you can specify a value. So the value is going to be hello, and this here is going to be added within an internal bundle within the intent class or within the intent instance. and then you will be able to send it to other activities. But always make sure whatever manipulations that you add on the intent instance, make sure that you add your manipulations or your code before calling the start activity or the start activity function. Now great, we'll go to the third activity to retrieve the value that we passed from the second activity. So here we are navigating from the second activity to the third activity, and we are passing some data. We want to receive this data within the third activity. So you can do this with the intent property syntax within our activity. And this intent here is the intent that started this activity. So it's the same intent that we passed to the start activity function right here. So you can use it to get the extra bundle or the extra information that we passed to the intent. And we can use this here, intent.getStringExtra. And here we will add our key or the same key that we used before. So you can simply just make this key a global key on top of the file, not a literal value. So this is what we're going to do. So greet key, and it is going to be a global constant. So const val is equal to the greet key value. Now we are going to use the same key here. So greet key, and we will save this within a variable. To val greetings or greeting, and here we are going to make a toast. This to the context, and the value is going to be greeting. Now let's run to see the result. You see, once you go to the second activity, then the third activity, hello is passed from the second activity to the third activity with the help of the intent. So that was it for this video. I hope you can grasp the amount of information that we talked about in this video, and if you really can't grasp any of them, if the video was just so complicated, let me know down in the comments below. I'll answer all your questions, and I'll provide you some tips on how we can manage different activities or on anything that we talked about in this video. So thank you for watching, and I hope I see you in the next video.